from.
अच्छा इंट्रो आप कर रहे थे क्या?
जी जी सर. So before this topic, sir, two cents from my side that the topic is such vast subject, and sir Naeem has been from the Harvard graduation. He learned so many things, but two cents is that with the education we can uh, know that what to say, but with skill we can say how much to say, but with the attitude we can say uh, how it is to be said, and but with the wisdom it is either we have to say it or we don't have to say. Is very important. That's why today's topic would be the negotiation skill tricks and tips. The speaker today we have the Sir Naeem is from G13, retired as a soldier from Pakistan Air Force. He holds bachelor degree in aerospace engineering and has done MBA as well as MS Telecom from St. Mary University of Minnesota, USA. He has the exclusive distinction of holding two expert level certification in technology, one in networking, Cisco certified internet work expert, and the second is in ITIL expert. He is certified Lean Six Sigma Green Belt from McMaster University, Ontario, Canada. So Naeem started his IT career in Canada as a product development manager at Sprint Canada in the year 2000. He was credited with the successful launch of IP section based remote access and site to site VPN products. So Naeem has the distinction to conduct the training of first Cisco certified internet work expert, Cisco certified security professional, and network security courses at various training institutions in Karachi, Pakistan. The Naeem spent 10 years at Cisco, including 2 years in Qatar, where he was responsible for telecom customers in all GCC countries. He was then served in the Bell Canada and performed several ITIL roles such as the business relationship manager, service level manager, IT operation management support, and incident and problem management support. He is not only the intellectual in his own areas of professional interest, but a great company as well as a infotainment person. So I request with him so dedicate some good song to Sir Salman. Sir Naeem, hands over to you.
Thank you very much, Manzur. इंशाल्लाह हमने songs का रखेंगे session end पे.
सर बिफोर यू स्टार्ट थोड़ा सर थोड़ी सी मेरी 2 cents और भी हैं वो बिकॉज वी मस्ट सम कैरी होम बिकॉज इसमें कुछ यंग जनरेशन लोग भी ज्वाइन करेंगे तो वेबिनार कंडक्ट करने का भी एक छोटा सा नॉर्म्स होता है ऑल दोज हु हैव द क्वेश्चन दे मस्ट रेज हैंड और इन द चैट दे कैन राइट द क्वेश्चन however 65 and above are exception.
So I'm an exception, just kidding. मुझे आप presenter rights दे देंगे?
ना सर
जी आप शेयर कर सकते हैं कोई इशू नहीं है.
Okay, good. So 1 second.
शेयर स्क्रीन करें. प्रॉब्लम होता है तो मैं को होस्ट बना देता हूँ आपको.
ठीक है, नहीं ठीक है, अभी आप मुझे बस बता दीजिएगा कि आप देख सकते हैं या नहीं.
जी आ गई आपकी स्क्रीन.
Awesome. All right, that's great. So thank you so much, Manzur, for the introduction, and thank you everybody and all the seniors. Assalamu alaikum. It's great to be a part of this group, and I'm really honored to have the opportunity to share some of the knowledge that I was fortunate to be part of at Harvard Business School. This was 2012 when Cisco just gave me this nice gift of a 1-week training at Harvard Business School on negotiation skills. And even though this was almost 9 years ago, I've been thinking about putting together and summarizing all the key learnings from that training into a couple of hours, and then actually uploaded a training at Udemy website. People can buy it from there as well. And then Manzur got into, somehow got into this group, and Manzur asked me to present it to this forum, and I'm really happy to be here. All right, so let's just get going. This is going to be the agenda or the topics that we're going to be covering in this session. And I'll try to squeeze everything into an hour that we have here, and maybe even less, I don't know. So we'll talk about a negotiation genius, and it's a quick story I want to share just to give you an idea what a negotiation genius can do and how a negotiation genius can turn around a situation. We'll then talk about a 5-step pre-negotiation framework. Yes, there is some work that you have to do before you walk into a negotiation. A lot of us think that we're really experts, and actually indeed we are in this forum. At least I think we've all been negotiating various deals. But what I learned in the training was that there are 5 steps that we should do before we walk into a negotiation, and we'll talk about that. And then we'll talk about a negotiator's toolkit, which has 3 tools or 3 strategies. So we'll cover those. And then we will talk about psychology of negotiation. And as we all know that you're always negotiating with people, and human beings are, just it's a very complex machine, right? And there is no operating manual. So every time you run into a different individual, you gotta know how to deal with that individual. And that's where our psychologists that have done a lot of research on how human brains process information, how people think, what biases people have. And that's what we're going to talk about in this section. The 4 common biases that impact how people negotiate. And then we'll talk about strategies of influence. So there are 8 strategies that we're going to cover, and that will hopefully help us deal with other human beings and be able to influence their decisions in our favor. So that's really the objective. And then we'll talk about some mistakes that most negotiators make, and this will help us avoid those mistakes when we are negotiating with with other people. And then lastly, we'll talk about situations when it's best to not negotiate or just walk away from a negotiation. All right, so let's dive in to that story that I mentioned. So this takes us back almost over 100 years ago in 1912, when the former US President Theodore Roosevelt was campaigning for a 3rd term. And what his campaign team did was they printed 3 million copies with one of his speech, and they also put one of his pictures on the brochure. And then the team realized that they didn't really have the permission of the photographer. And the copyright law at that time allowed the photographer to demand as much as $1 per copy, which could have meant $3 million. And this is when the campaign team realized that they can't distribute those flyers. So how do they resolve the situation, right? They've already printed 3 million copies. They've already used a picture from a photographer that didn't really have specific permission for this. So they brought in the campaign manager, who was a really genius negotiator, and this is what he did. So this is, and I want to give you a few seconds to really think about what would you have done if you were in that position. But anyways, this is what he did. He sent a telegram to the photographer because they wanted to make sure that they're not distributing copies and then get sued in the court. So that's what the campaign manager did. He sent a telegram planning to distribute 3 million copies of campaign speech with photographs. Excellent publicity opportunity for photographers. How much are you willing to pay to use your photographs? Respond immediately. So he completely turned around the situation, asking the photographer how much is he willing to pay to use his photograph, because he presented it as if, it's a great opportunity for you if you use your photographs. And of course, this was for the president of the U.S. So I guess there was, there was some room to turn the situation around. And this is what the photographer responded. Appreciate the opportunity, but I can only afford to pay $250. So this is how they resolved the situation. They collected $250 from the photographer for the picture that they're already printed. All right, so let's jump into the 5-step pre-negotiation framework. These are 5 things that we should keep in mind before we walk into a negotiation. Number 1, assess your BATNA. BATNA. BATNA stands for Best Alternative to Negotiated Agreement. What would I do if I didn't close this deal? What would I do? So what's my best alternative? Number 2, calculate your reservation value. Reservation value is really your walkaway point. So at what point are you just going to walk away from the negotiation? It's not making sense, right? Step number 3, assess the other party's BATNA. So if you're wondering, how would I assess the other party's BATNA? Basically, you're being asked to estimate what the other party's BATNA is, which also prompts you to, I guess, know more about the other party, right? Think about them, find out more information about the other party so you can have a better estimate of their BATNA. What could be the best alternative for them? And again, this is an assessment because you don't really know them, but it's encouraging you to know more about them. See, try to learn what their priorities are. Step number 4 is calculating the other party's reservation value. Again, you're just estimating what could be their walkaway point. At what point are they just going to walk away? What do I know about them? Based on that information, I'm going to assess their reservation value. And step number 5 is to evaluate ZOPA, or Zone of Possible Agreements. These are all possible values that can result in a deal. The value that would be acceptable to you and would be acceptable to the other party. So those are the 5 steps that every negotiator must look into before walking into a negotiation. So let's quickly go through each one of them. Assessing your BATNA is really, three steps that you want to do. Number 1, identify all plausible alternative options if you don't reach an agreement. So think of all the possible options that might exist if you didn't close the deal. Estimate the value associated with each alternative. So try and assign a value to each of the alternatives that are available, that are possible, and then select the best alternative. This is your BATNA. Because without a clear understanding of your BATNA, it is impossible to know when to accept the final offer and when to walk away. So this is something you got to do before you walk into a negotiation. Step number 2 is calculating your reservation value, which we said is your really walkaway point. It is the lowest offer you'd be willing to accept. So once you have assessed your BATNA and all the possible options and selected the best option, that's what would determine or help you determine what would be your reservation value. If you are risk averse, you might be inclined to lean towards a lower reservation value. Of course, it depends on you, and also depends on the type of deal you're walking into for negotiation. Step number 3 was assessing the other party's BATNA, and of course, once you have assessed your own BATNA and reservation value, you have a good idea of the lowest offer you would be willing to accept, and the objective then at this point for this step number 3 is to try, understand the priorities of the other party, and you're learning about the other party. So this step can really make a difference between getting a good deal and getting a great deal. Step number 4 is assessing their reservation value, and as you've already assessed your own reservation value, your BATNA, and you've all estimated the BATNA of the other party, that'll give you a good idea what their reservation value could be. It should prompt you to do a careful and deep analysis of the other party's situation. And then, once you've done those 4 things, that'll help you, I guess, come up with the zone of possible agreements. These are just all possible values that both parties would be willing to agree on and close the deal. So that's your pre-negotiation framework. And I think that was pretty simple and basic. So let's jump into the negotiator's toolkit. And if you recall, we talked about 3 tools that a negotiator has in the toolkit, or 3 strategies. Strategy number 1 is claiming value in a negotiation. So as you walk into a negotiation, you want to claim as much value as possible from a negotiation. The tool number 2, or strategy number 2, is creating value in a negotiation. So not only you want to claim the maximum value that you can from a negotiation, you want to create value. And how do you create value? We'll talk about that when we get to that topic. The third tool or strategy is investigative negotiation. And we'll talk about that as well in more detail. So let's jump into the first tool, which is claiming value in a negotiation. So obviously, the objective of claiming value in negotiation is to get the best deal for yourself and for your company. But let's define the term value. Value is whatever people find useful or desirable, whatever. It could be measured in dollars, utility, happiness, or anything else. Whatever people find useful or desirable, that's value. So obviously, when you're going into a negotiation, you're thinking about, how can I claim the lion's share of value in this negotiation? The next thing you're thinking about is, should I make the first offer? So the primary benefit of making a first offer is that it establishes an anchor. What is an anchor? An anchor is a number that focuses the other party's attention and expectations. The power of anchors is substantial. It is big. All right, so we talked about anchors. Now, what if the other party has made the first offer? So that means the other party has established an anchor already. What do you do then? How do you respond to an initial offer or an anchor? Ignore the anchor. Now, ignore doesn't mean as if you pretend that you didn't hear it. But by ignoring, it means you shift the conversation. Shift the conversation. And you shift the conversation to something else in the deal other than the anchor. Another strategy to counter an initial offer is to make an anchored counter offer and then propose moderation. So what you can do, if the other party has already made the first offer and established an anchor, what you can do is you can make an anchored counter offer, an aggressive one, and then propose moderation. So let's say in the case of purchase of a house, if the other party has already made an offer, $300,000, so that means they've established an anchor, and in order to counter the initial offer, what you can do is make an anchored counter offer, aggressive one. So let's say from $300,000, you can say, you go back and say, I can pay $200,000, much less, and then propose moderation, and then go up. Right, and in claiming value in a negotiation, you are trying to negotiate the relationship. And what's meant by negotiating the relationship here is really about managing the other side's satisfaction. Satisfaction has less to do with how well someone actually negotiated and more to do with how well they think they negotiated. So not necessarily how well they really negotiated, but it's how well they think, right? Again, it's the psyche. So if they think that they've done a good job of negotiation, that's what really matters. So your reputation as a negotiator really hinges on your ability to manage the other side's perceptions, their satisfaction. So bottom line, you have two distinct goals in any negotiation. Number one, to get a good deal. That's obvious. And number two, to strengthen your relationship. So when you walk into a negotiation, you have two things in mind as you claim the maximum value from a negotiation, is to get a good deal for yourself and then strengthen a relationship. That's key. All right, so let's move on to the next tool, which is creating value in negotiation. Effective negotiators will always look for opportunities to create value in any negotiation. And one of the ways you do that is by creating value is through log rolling. Now, log rolling is making trades across multiple issues. Making trades across multiple issues. It requires that you know your priorities as well as the priorities of the other side. And if you know that the other side values something more than you do, you give it to them in exchange for something that you value more. So you bring in multiple issues, you give them concession on one hand, and then take concession from them for something that you value more. And that's how you can create value in a negotiation, by trading across multiple issues. So was there a question? Okay. The next tip.
मेरा एक question है कि let's suppose you don't know the let's say if you are purchasing a house and you don't know what is the actual value, and you try to negotiate with a very low or a very high. So where to start, basically, that's the question. If you don't know exactly where to start.
So you know what I mean, and that's where the pre-negotiation framework comes in, because you have to know. You're trying to find as much information as possible, and in this age of technology and information, it's not very hard to get information, to collect that information. So I guess what's being recommended here is not only you try and understand about, when you walk into a negotiation, you know about the entire deal that you're going into. You have a good understanding of the other party's priorities, their situation, and what they are thinking, their people. So I guess you are doing that research, all of that, before even you walk into a negotiation. So I'm assuming if you're buying a house, and you don't buy a house every now and then, you have done your research, so you understand the market value in a certain area, in the area of your interest, for example. You already have all of that information. And these days, it's not very difficult to get that information. So when you walk into a negotiation, you're already prepared. Not only that you know about the value of the house, you also know who is selling it. Why are they selling it? Are they, are they people that are going bankrupt and they've got to sell it because they just need money desperately, right? For example, right? All of that, you're trying to collect that information before you even walk into a negotiation.
I agree with you, sir. लेकिन मेरा जो personal experience है, like we went to China, there, I mean, they were telling very high prices to the foreigners. So when my friend, used to say very low price, I was very astonished. And then they start from there. We didn't knew exactly where to start. And naturally, अगर वो जैसे हम इवन कालीन भी लेने जाते हैं पेशावर से, वो भी एक बहुत हाई प्राइस देगा और बड़ी लो, फाइनली लो पे आपको सेल कर देगा. मतलब
तो आपने बिल्कुल सही कहा है, आपने बिल्कुल सही कहा है. और मैं ये जो हम जो चीज अभी यहाँ पे देख रहे हैं और सीख रहे हैं, ये मेरा ख्याल है पठानों से कालीन वाली सिचुएशन में शायद ये अप्लाई ना ही हो बिल्कुल, क्योंकि हम जो बात कर रहे हैं वो we're talking about big deals here. We're, those are, and then also culturally कुछ चीजें जो हैं वो आपको थोड़ी awareness होना जरूरी है culturally. तो जैसे आपने कहा पेशावर में वाकई पठान जो है वो 800 रुपए का स्टार्ट करेगा और वो आपको 150 में दे देगा.
कॉर्पोरेट नेगोशिएशन की बात करें,
हम थोड़ा सा इसको हम मतलब ये आलू प्याज टमाटर की नेगोशिएशन, और फिर ये पाकिस्तान में शुगर माफिया पे शायद अप्लाई ना हो सके, जहाँ पे there are people with bad intentions and people, all kinds of people, right? That's a mafia, and you can still apply some of the techniques, but we're talking about things of bigger magnitude, things that are more than just buying a car, for example. You can still use
fundamental principles remain the same in
Yes.
all sides of negotiation.
Correct. I agree with you.
Apply them.
Yeah, I agree with you 100%, 100%. So basically what we're learning here is just, I guess, the science behind a negotiation, right? And there's so many different factors that are playing a role here. And we're just learning each one of them, and then some will apply into a situation A, and others, might not. So,
if we can, that would be great to finish the presentation and then go for question answers and discussions. That might be wasting others' time, please.
Yeah, I think I like that.
Thank you. Thank you.
All right. So the other thing we can do as you are creating value in a negotiation is by adding issues. You just bring in more issues to a negotiation, add more things. So there is what they say is that there's a simple formula: more issues, more currency. You bring in more things to, add more things to the negotiation, you're adding more currency. So for example, instead of focusing only on price, try to introduce other aspects such as delivery date, financing, contract length, warranties, future business potential, level of support, etc., etc., etc. So try to add issues to a negotiation. So when you walk into a negotiation, and if there are only 2 things that are being talked about, think of things that can be added. And some of this thinking, I'm assuming, as a good negotiator, you've already done before you walk into the negotiation. So anyways, if you want to create value in a negotiation, you add issues, because adding issues means you're adding currency. Another thing you can do when you're trying to create value in a negotiation is by creating value through contingency contracts. What are contingency contracts? contingency contracts allow negotiators to avoid arguing about the likelihood of some future event. Let me give you an example. Let's say you're buying a TV serial from a producer of a drama, right? You've seen a drama produced. Yeah, you're buying that serial. The producer says, you know, this is going to be a super hit. It's 50 episodes and people are going to love it. It's 5 million rupees or 50 million rupees, whatever it is, right? So you can say, okay, you know what, why don't we do this? A contingency contract will be something like this. What we're going to do is we're going to insert a clause in this contract, and we're going to say, if the rating of this drama serial is 8 out of 10, whatever that rating is or the system is, if it's 8 or above, the price is going to be this. If it's 4 or below or 5 or below, the price is going to be this. So some future event, instead of arguing about something that hasn't happened yet and you're not sure, you bring in a contingency contract and you put in clauses. So instead of guessing and estimating, you put in clauses to nail things down, right? If it's more than this, that means my channel will, you know, my rating will go really, really super high. That means I'm going to make a lot of money. So I'm going to give you this price for it. But if it's 4 or below, I'm just going to, that's a contingency contract. And these are based on assumptions. So you don't know for sure, right? You just base it on assumptions, something that's acceptable to both sides. Another thing you can do to create value in a negotiation is negotiate multiple issues simultaneously. So remember how adding issues we said can help create value in a negotiation? Negotiating multiple issues simultaneously also helps create value in a negotiation. And if you're wondering which issues to negotiate first, right, the easiest or the most difficult, what's being said here is just bring in multiple issues simultaneously, because then it makes room for log rolling. So you can, what you can do is you can trade, you know, you can give them something in concession in one area and get concession in another area. Another tool for creating value in a negotiation is called post-negotiation or post-settlement settlement, post-negotiation strategy or post-settlement settlement, PSS. Now, PSS is really something that very few negotiators know about and very few negotiators use, but it's very, very effective. And what PSS does is once you have closed a deal, when you have closed a deal, a PSS suggests that you go back to the other party and you add more things to it. Because what happens is once you've already agreed on a deal, both parties are now more likely to talk about other items or other issues. So a PSS will always create value in a negotiation, because what you do is once you've closed the deal, so that means you already got something you wanted, there is still an opportunity to add more to it, because your objective is to create more value from a negotiation. So a PSS is a very powerful tool, but not very commonly used because people just don't know about it. You got to go to Harvard Business School to learn about this. Just kidding. So the next tool that we have in our kit as a good negotiator is investigative negotiation. Now, investigative negotiation is really a mindset, but it's also a methodology. The goal here is to learn as much as possible about the situation and the people involved in the negotiation. There are 7 principles of investigative negotiations. We'll just quickly go through each one of them. Number 1, don't just ask what, ask why. A lot of the times we understand what's being discussed, but sometimes we really don't know why it's being discussed. And I'll give you an example, and this was shared with us during our training as well. There was a Fortune 500 company in the US. that needed an ingredient for one of their products that they manufactured in the US from a farmer in Europe. So, they gave the guy the price, the guy wanted in Europe. Everything was done. Everybody was really happy, and they finally sent the contract for signature. So the guy refused. So the farmer refused, and the American company thought that we made a really good offer. This is what the guy expected. So they found out that there was a clause in their contract, which is probably a standard clause, that they wanted exclusive rights. So the guy said, "No, I'm not going to agree to the exclusive. You don't have exclusivity on this product." And they were thinking that we are buying everything this guy can produce, but why is he not willing to sign the exclusivity clause? So, and it was really important for them to close the deal because timing was important. They were getting a good deal. The product was really good. So they had to actually send a negotiator to Europe to find out what's causing this. Why is the farmer not willing to agree to exclusivity? Because they were willing to buy everything he could produce. The negotiator there, when he asked the question why, and understood why was the farmer not willing to sign that clause, they found out that this guy had a cousin who wanted to buy a few hundred pounds of the same product. So he was saying, well, I can't sign exclusivity with you because 200 pounds I have to sell to this cousin of mine who makes something with it. That was a simple thing to close, right? So they added a clause and they said, okay, except for this guy, 200 pounds, everything else, we have exclusivity on everything else. And, the deal was signed. So really asking the question why is important. And a lot of the times people don't ask the question why. Principle number 2, seek to reconcile interests, not demands. Don't be discouraged when the demands of both parties seem incompatible. Focus on the underlying interests of the other party. Understand what is it they're looking for. For example, a job candidate asking for a higher salary, right? Much higher than the pay grade that you have, for example, the candidate can, and it's a really brilliant candidate you don't want to miss. That candidate can settle for less if you really understood the underlying interests, which could be, for example, big hiring bonus, for example, or other perks, a car, maybe, for example. So not salary, you can't budge on the salary, but maybe a car. So seek to reconcile interests, not demands. That's principle number 2. Principle number 3, creating common grounds with uncommon allies. Once you understand the underlying interests of the other party, it is possible to simultaneously cooperate and compete with others. So, look for those opportunities for competition, where you can cooperate in some areas and compete in other areas. Interpret demands as opportunities. So, typically when facing demands from the other side, negotiators normally would adopt a defensive posture. How can I avoid accepting the demand? What's being suggested here is good negotiators would try to learn about the needs and interests of the other party from these demands. How can I use this information to create and capture value? So, for example, a construction company that was proposing really, very high penalties for late delivery. Now that's a demand, but if you are in that situation, so you may want to throw in something else in there, right? Okay, I agree to your penalties, but if you finish the project 2 weeks ahead of time, you're going to give us X bonus. So interpret demands as opportunities for yourself. Don't go on the defensive. Principle number 5, don't dismiss anything as their problem, because other side's problems are our problems. Their deadline is our deadline. So again, we already learned about negotiating the relationship, right? Managing the other side's satisfaction. So that's the kind of mindset you have. Principle number 6, don't let negotiations end with a rejection of your offer. Now that's really, really important. A lot of the times what happens is if your proposal gets rejected, you just walk away, just, cursing yourself and your company and blah, blah, blah. But well, if your offer gets rejected, you still have an opportunity. So don't let that rejection be the end of the negotiation. You can always go back to the other side and try and understand what was it that made them reject your offer, or what is it you could have done differently to make your offer acceptable. Maybe there was a very small, simple thing that was missing from your proposal that the other party was expecting to see in the proposal, and you got rejected because that simple thing that's really a no-brainer for you and doesn't even cost you money to add to the proposal, could have done it. And you can always, even when your offer is rejected, recover from it and win the deal. Principle number 7, understand the difference between selling and negotiating. So selling is focused on product features and strengths of your case, whereas negotiating is understanding the other side's interests, their needs, their priorities, their constraints, and their perspectives. So really, I think a big lesson here is for a good negotiator is to learn as much as possible about the other side. With an investigative approach, you may be able to get everything you want without really giving up much or perhaps anything, if you have that kind of approach. So those were the 3 tools for a negotiator, and then we'll jump into the psychology of negotiations, where rationality fails. We'll talk about 4 biases that most people have, and basically this is learning about these biases and being aware of these biases will not only avoid us from falling into that trap, but also helping us see this when we see it coming from the other side. So behavioral decision research emphasizes that negotiators should approach a negotiation with a rational mindset. We all know that, but a lot of us are not rational people, because all of us have our own biases. Negotiators should be aware of mental habits and biases that might prevent them or the other side from following rational advice. Irrational negotiators end up making systematic and predictable mistakes. And that's really the key here. What we're learning here is we're learning about those systematic and predictable mistakes that all of us make. And once you know about that, when you're consciously aware of those, we're going to not only avoid those from happening, but also be ready when you see that coming from the other side. So those 4 biases that we're going to talk about, and these are the most common biases. Of course, there are other biases as well. So these are fixed pie bias, vividness bias, non-rational escalation of commitment bias, and susceptibility to framing. So we're going to talk about those 4. Again, they've done this, the whole negotiation, they've turned it into a science, right? So I guess if I'm going into a negotiation, if I know all of this, I'll make my notes, prepare myself, understand about the other party. So before I walk in, I'm already prepared to start the conversation. All right, what's a fixed pie bias? A fixed pie bias is where people think that the value in a negotiation is fixed. There's no up or down. It's black and white. Not everything is black and white. There are various shades of gray, right? So that's what is being said here. If we have a fixed pie bias, as a good negotiator, we want to avoid having that bias in our conversation, in our negotiation. It refers to a negotiator's assumption that the value derived from a negotiation is fixed. It is not fixed. You can always create more value in a negotiation. For a good negotiator, it is essential to overcome the fixed pie bias and look for ways to have a mutually beneficial trade. do not focus solely on capturing value for just yourself in a deal. Right? You can end up with a deal where both sides walk away or go back home with something to feel good about. Fixed bias will make you believe that whatever is good for the other side is bad for us. Wrong. Not true. It could be good for the other side, but we might get something from it as well. So I guess stay, be aware of this bias that you might have. Enter a negotiation with the goal of looking for areas in which you can create value or increase the size of the pie. That's number one. The other party does not have to lose for you to win, right? That's a different mindset. So your aim is not to make the other side lose the deal. And all the tricks we learned in, when we were talking about the negotiator toolkit in creating value, such as negotiating multiple issues simultaneously, adding more issues to the table, making multiple offers simultaneously, using contingency contracts. All of those are tips that you can use to add value to a negotiation. All right, so the next bias is called vividness bias. In general, we all know this, vivid information has a greater effect on negotiators than dull or not so vivid information, right? Vivid information, good things, those shiny objects, things that stand out, that look good. Good negotiators evaluate both vivid and dull information diligently to ascertain the true value. So, I mean, because, many people have that bias, they only look for the shiny objects, the things that look really nice on the face, and that they get influenced by it. So as a good negotiator, you want to make sure that you evaluate both the vivid and dull information diligently to make sure that you ascertain really the true value from a negotiation, and that the vivid pieces of information are not falsely influencing your decision. Following things can help avoid overweighting the vivid information. Number one, creating a scoring system with weightage for each point. Really. So come up with a criteria, have a scoring system, assign weightages to each, and come up with the true value, the true answer. Separating information from influences. Good negotiators will ask the following questions. Number one, is this information valuable? Have I learned something new? Am I just being influenced because how the information was presented? So I guess, yeah. Don't fall for things that may look just more shiny or attractive at first glance, but don't really offer the same value you can find in things that are much more affordable or less vivid or dull. All right, the next bias is non-rational escalation of commitment. Research has shown that negotiators have a strong psychological need to justify to themselves their prior decisions and behaviors, and I think this applies to most of us. Once you've made a decision, you hired a guy at a company, and if the person isn't performing well, you don't want to accept that you made the wrong choice in the beginning. Chances are that you're just going to justify his existence in the company and just keep that person on and on for way longer because you've already made that wrong choice in the beginning. And the bias is called non-rational escalation of commitment. Escalation is all the more likely if negotiators believe they have too much invested already to quit now, right? So you keep you keep going down that path, and then you say, okay, it's you know, I've gone way too long. There's no point turning back. Wrong. Wrong. You've been escalating all through. Right. There are 3 ways to avoid escalating. Number 1, start your negotiation with a pre-planned exit strategy. You must have an exit strategy in mind when you walk into a negotiation. Number 2, assign and even reward a devil's advocate whose job is to just criticize your decisions and find faults in your logic, right? So this person it should be someone who's trustworthy, has no role in the initial analysis, and no conflict of interest. So bring in somebody, a friend, a relative, a neighbor, a consultant who has no, I guess, influence on the prior decisions, has no conflict of interest, you know, somebody who's completely neutral. And another way you can avoid escalating is anticipate and prepare for the escalation forces you're likely to encounter. So you anticipate those before you walk into the negotiation, sort of, I guess, preparing for negotiation, part of your preparation. The next bias of the mind is susceptibility to framing. This is another form of bias that you will find in people. This relates to how various options are framed. Research on framing, and you might even find books on just this bias alone. Research on framing effects reveals that most of us will treat risks involving perceived gains differently from risks involving perceived losses. Let me repeat that. Most of us will treat risks involving perceived gains differently from risks involving perceived losses. So it's just how you frame it. You can frame it in terms of perceived gains. You know, you close this deal and you're going to get this, this, and this. And you can frame it in terms of perceived losses. If you don't close the deal, you're going to lose on this, this, and this, right? Just how you frame it. Really, really important. So they did some research, you know, for folks that go to casinos, and they found that, you know, for somebody to arrive at the casino, it's not very likely for that person to make $100 bet. But if there is a person that has been playing for some time and has already lost $600, $700, they're more likely to make another $100 bet because they're already down. They're already $600 loss. So it turns out that people are more likely to take a risk when they are already in the domain of losses. Losing your first $100 or 1,000 rupees or 5,000 rupees is more painful than losing the 7th $100. Once you are a loser, you won't mind digging yourself into a bigger hole. That's the point. So this way of thinking can powerfully affect our negotiation behavior. Negotiators are more likely to make concessions over how to allocate gains. So again, this is a very key point as well. The other side is more likely to make concessions over how you allocate gains, but less likely to make concessions over how you allocate losses. It's just how our brains are hardwired. Decisions based on framing effect are made by focusing on the way information is presented instead of the information itself. So I guess, how do you avoid from falling prey to this? You try and analyze the information itself as opposed to the way it's presented. Understanding the effects of framing and reference points can help negotiators anticipate their powerful consequences, and then they can strategize accordingly. So that was the 4th bias of mine. And that brings me to my last big section, and then we have 2 small, and it's 1 o'clock already, like Eastern time. I don't know, how much time do I have? Like, do I have another 10 minutes?
Sure.
Okay, good. So this section is really important because I think, again, it deals with strategies of influence. I'm going to go really fast, but I want to make sure that I hit the key points here. So let's just jump to the 8. So there are 8 strategies that we are discussing here. Strategy number 1 is highlight potential losses, not gains. In this strategy, we learned that the decision makers weigh information about potential losses more heavily than they do information about potential gains. Even if the gains and losses are equal magnitude, they would weigh information about potential losses more heavily than they do do information about potential gains. So keep that in mind. People are more motivated to avoid losses than they are to accrue gains. An example of this strategy is the negative, political ads that you see. For example, you see those ads, right? When candidates warn you about the dangers associated with electing their opponents rather than touting their own merit. So they would say, if you elect this other party, this is what they're going to do. Instead of saying, if you elect me, I'm going to bring you this, this, and this. Because the thing is, most people would weigh the information about potential losses more heavily. So I guess that's the message here. To make sure, people are more motivated to avoid losses than they are to accrue gains. So when you frame your proposal, make sure you keep that touch in it. Because decision makers will weigh information about potential losses more heavily than they do information about potential gains. So don't talk too much about potential gains. Bring in the things that they're going to lose if they don't close the deal. So state your proposal in terms of what potential gains to the other side stands to forego if your proposal is rejected. Don't say, my proposal is rejected, my proposal gives you these benefits. No, say, if my proposal is rejected, you're going to lose this, this, and this. That's how you should frame it. That's the whole point about strategy. Use it too often, but you're considered a very, perhaps as the last part of your, as part of your closing argument, or as you summarize your proposal, that's where you use it. Strategy number 2, disaggregate gains and aggregate losses. Again, people seem to prefer finding money in installments, but losing money in one lump sum. So disaggregate the gains and aggregate the losses. Really, that's as simple as it. So for example, let me give you an example, right? You're walking down the street and you find a $20 bill. You'd say, oh, really great. In another scenario, and this is, people have done research on this. In another scenario, you're walking down the street, you find a $10 bill. The next day, you're walking down that street again and you find another $10 bill. You'd be happier in the second scenario where you find 2 $10 bills on 2 consecutive days. You'd be just more happy. We'll be happier, even though the total amount is the same. So, they've done research where the guy who found the $20 bill was less happy than the guy who found 2 $10 bills on 2 consecutive days. It's just that, that's how our brains are hardwired. So separating total gains into lots of small wins has higher acceptance. That's really the key. Separate your gains or the benefits. Disaggregate gains. If you're making concessions, do not make them all at once. Do not make concessions at once, right? Make them, separate them out. Your counterpart will evaluate strings of concessions more positively than one lump sum concession. So if you're giving a concession, don't give one lump sum concession, separate them. Disaggregate the gains or concessions. If you have good news to share, try to parcel the information into smaller chunks. Don't share all the good information at once. Try to parcel it into smaller chunks over a period of time. That's really the message here. When asking the other side to make concessions, make one comprehensive demand rather than several partial demands. So again, this is really another key to this strategy. When you are making concessions, separate them out. But when you're asking for concessions, consolidate them. That's really the key. If you have bad news to share, share it all at once. If you have costs or burdens imposed, combine them into one. Don't have 5 terms of burdens or penalties. Just combine them into one. Just looks better. All right, strategy number 3, employ the door in the face technique. What is door in the face? Door in the face strategy can be described as an approach where the negotiator makes a much more difficult and unreasonable demand first, and then followed immediately by a less severe and much more reasonable demand. So you put a bigger demand first, and then trim that down to a smaller one later. And they did research in Arizona State University, where they asked 2 groups of students to pose as workers from the county juvenile detention center. So 2 groups of students, they were asked to pose as the county juvenile detention center, and they were asked to stop people in the streets, asking them if they would be willing to accompany a group of juvenile offenders on a day trip to the zoo. Right? That was their project. You just go out on the street, ask everybody that's walking down the street, ask them if they would be willing to accompany a group of juvenile offenders on a day trip to the zoo. Only 17% of the people said yes or agreed to it. Only 17. 83% of the people said, I'm not interested. And then what they did was they took a second group of students, but they changed the question. They said, ask the people the first question, that if they would be willing to serve as a counselor at the juvenile detention center, which would require about 2 hours a week for 3 years, right? So they asked, so this group of students were on the street asking everybody if they would be willing to serve as a counselor at the juvenile detention center, which would require 2 hours per week for 3 years. Almost everybody turned down the request, for sure. But then the researchers, those students, immediately followed with another question. Would you be willing to accompany the group of juvenile offenders on a day trip to the zoo? Guess what? This time, 50% of the people agreed. Same people that said, no, we're not willing to spend 2 hours a week for 3 years. That's not going to happen. But then when the same question that was asked by the other group, when they asked us that as a second question, 50% of the people agreed. That's the door in the face technique. I don't have to say more, but that's the door in the face technique. So the expected result of this strategy is an initial rejection to the first demand, but a more agreeable and favorable response to your second demand. That's really the key. The next strategy is employ the foot in the door technique. And what is foot in the door technique? Here, the researchers found that someone has agreed to an initial request. They're more psychologically committed to seeing the process through to its end and agreeing to a second request that naturally follows from the initial request. So, you start with a simple thing, and if they agree to it, you throw in your next demand. But start with something simple. This approach is called foot in the door. Aims for initial compliance with a simple request and then increasing your demand. That's what it is. Foot in the door is you get your foot in the door by a simple request, and then you follow immediately by your actual demand or request. Strategy number 5 is leverage the power of justification. This is really huge. Leverage the power of justification. Find some way to justify your position. Human beings are hardwired. Again, this is how our brains think, to accommodate the legitimate demands of others because it allows us to build mutually rewarding relationships. Even entirely frivolous justifications have the power to induce compliance. And they did a research where, what they did was at a campus, university campus, they went to the librarian and they said, you've got 4 or 5 photocopy machines. Why don't you turn off all except one? We want to see a big lineup at that photocopy machine because all the others are dysfunctional, not working, out of order. So what they wanted to do was they wanted to see if somebody were to break the queue, right? So they saw a queue at the photocopy machine, and then they had these students posing as genuine students who want to make some photocopy. And then what they did was they asked them to go in the front of the line and then just ask the question, I've got, excuse me, I've got 5 pages to copy. Can I use the photocopy machine? That's all they said. Excuse me, I've 5 pages to copy. Can I use the photocopy machine? And 50% of the people were allowed. But then they changed it to, excuse me, I have 5 pages to copy. Can I use the photocopy machine? Because I have to make some copies. The only thing they did different was they added the word because I have to make some copies. Of course, you have to make some copies. But just because of that, the compliance rate jumped to 93%. So I guess that's what is being said here. Leverage the power of justification, even if your justification is entirely frivolous. People are willing to go the extra mile to help those who will become obligated to us. That's just that's how we think, most of us. In order to justify your demand, try to use words like because. So when you are making a demand, try to justify why. Refrain from making demands without a justification. So never do that. And in negotiations, don't just let your offer speak for itself. Provide a justification for your demand, and then tell a story as well where possible, right? To legitimize your story. All right, strategy number 6. I've got 2 more to go after this. Leverage the power of social proof. Social proof is a psychological phenomenon where people assume that the action of others are correct, and we see that all day long, right? So they did another research here for those you've seen those TV infomercials selling various products. So how they did the research was they used one group of operators to say, please call now. Operators are standing by, please call now. That's what they said. So all the operators were saying, or in the ad, they were saying, operators are standing by, please call now. And they saw the response. And then in another research, they changed that to, so again, keep in mind, the first sentence was operators are standing by, please call now, right? It's call for action, right? They changed that to say, if operators are busy, please call again. That's all they did. In the ad itself, instead of saying operators are standing by, please call now, they changed that to, if operators are busy, please call again. And the call rate just jumped through the roof. Why? Because people thought that a lot of people are calling, so I must call as well. And they're saying, if it's busy, call again. So that means they must be super busy. So that means it must be a good product. Examples of effective social proof are customer reviews, client testimonials, certifications or awards, case studies, etc. Clever brands will always use social proof, right? This strategy is used in negotiation to influence the decision of the other party. Always, always, always. Strategy number 7, making token unilateral concessions. Unilateral concession. Research on trust and reciprocity suggests that gifts and concessions given unilaterally often induce reciprocity, compliance, or agreement. So in a negotiation, look for things where you can give a concession unilaterally without asking for anything in return. Examples of some token concessions are, for example, you agree to meet at a time or location that's more convenient to the other side. I'm willing to drive like 2 hours, just make it convenient unilaterally. Or on the way to negotiation, you purchase coffee for everybody else. That's unilateral. Or you begin the discussion by agreeing to one of their smaller requests from the other side. So you say, oh, okay, by the way, yeah, I heard you were expecting this, that's agreed. So that's how you start the conversation, because you get huge reward in return. All right, the last strategy here is using reference points to make your offers and demands seem reasonable. Using reference points. So they did a research again, and everything was based on research there. And I'm going to take a few more minutes, if that's okay. So they did a research where, a calculator, for example, was $60 at one store. And then they told the people that they were researching, that if that same calculator that was available for $60 at this store, if it was $40 at another store, which is half an hour drive, would you be willing to go? Most people said, yeah, I'm happy to go. And if I can save, $60, and if I can save 1/3 the price, I'll try it. But for the same thing, when people were buying a computer worth $2,000, and then they asked the people, would you be willing to drive half an hour to save $20? Most people said, well, I need at least $200 discount to drive half an hour. So you see how reference points make so much of difference? That when you were buying a $2,000 computer, you needed a $200 discount to drive half an hour. But for a $60 calculator, you were willing to drive half an hour to save $20. That's the impact of a reference point. Because people do not objectively evaluate the costs of an item or an issue. Rather, they evaluate costs in comparison with salient reference points. People not only care about the value of the item they're buying, but also about getting a good deal. That's really important. Again, it's in our psyche. We want a good deal, not just a good price. That's really the point of this strategy. So think about reference points as you're putting together your proposal. And that's why, car salespeople, when they're selling a $30,000 car, they find it really easy to slip in a $300 floor mat, even though you can buy it for $30. But from the agency, you're buying a brand new car, they can, easily add a $300 floor mat, which would cost you like $30. Anyway, so those were 8 strategies. Always try to use reference points when possible to make your offer more meaningful. All right, I've got 2 more sections to go, but they're really, really simple. Do I still have let's say 5 more minutes to cover these 2 sections?
2 minutes.
Okay, sir. Wait a minute.
2?
Yeah.
All right.
Wind up within 5 minutes.
2. Okay, so I'll just show you the slide. I mean, without spending too much time on it, 1 minute on each. These are some common negotiator mistakes: making the first offer but not in a strong position, talking too much but not listening enough. That's really, really bad. Trying to influence the other party without learning from them. We talked about that several times. Learn as much as possible about the other party. Not challenging your assumptions about the other party, or miscalculating the ZOPA. Again, you should keep challenging your assumptions that you use to assess their BATNA and their reservation value. So keep challenging yourself about your assumptions, or making greater concessions than the other party. So I guess those are some common mistakes people make. Make sure you don't make those mistakes. And then situations when you don't want to negotiate is when your BATNA stinks and everybody knows it. If everybody knows that your BATNA really stinks, you really don't have an alternative, just walk away from a negotiation. There's no point carrying on. Or when negotiation sends the wrong signal. What a situation would we be where, let me come back to that later. I don't think I have enough time. But when negotiating can send a wrong signal, you don't negotiate. Or when relationships might suffer, because we talked about building relationships with the other party. So when you think your relationship might suffer, walk away from a negotiation, because you want to keep the relationship for perhaps another deal in the future. Or when negotiating is culturally inappropriate. So for example, in the US, when you come out of the New York airport, you don't negotiate fare with the taxi driver, right? The cab driver, you sit in the cab and they just turn on the meter and you go. Like in Pakistan, or in many other countries, every single time you negotiate fare with the cab driver, right? So it's culturally inappropriate to negotiate the fare in some countries. You don't want to negotiate when it's culturally inappropriate. And when your BATNA beats their best possible offer, you still don't want to carry on negotiating. And that's it. We're done.
May I suggest,
Well, Naeem,
Shahid?
that was a very.
Sir
let me,
Shahid,
Manzar,
I was
I got to
requesting you.
leave now. Yeah, it was a very informative presentation, Naeem. This is Shahid Ahmed.
So thank you, sir.
Very, full of knowledge and all. My question is, sir.
Yes, sir.
I'm interested in my country.
Yes, sir.
Whatever that you've been talking about, I think very reasonable as far as Europe, America is concerned. Yeah, in Pakistan and most of the business sectors, you have, like for any commodity or enterprise or whatever it is, you have cartels. अभी जैसे शुरू में जिक्र किया ना आपने चीनी का भी,
जी सर
cartels हैं, फिर like country like China, next door neighbor, they are very good friends, but they have mostly subsidized, पहले उन्हें हमारे टाइल्स के प्रॉब्लम में उन्हें बड़ा किया, टाइल इंडस्ट्री नीचे चली गई. You see, somehow ये cartels को कैसे हम beat करें? Negotiations उस वक्त हो रहा है when everything is fair and square. And where यहाँ पे there's a lot of competition, and in that competition people make cartels. When they make cartels, वो अपनी अपनी terms का इंतजार करते हैं कि इस टाइम मैं ले लेता हूँ, next time तुम ले लेना. So under the circumstances, what would you suggest for a country like ours for adopt such kind of negotiation strategies or whatever that you may call it? It bothers us a lot. Business here is a different ball game. I think we need to introduce certain things here in the country. मेरा basically concern ये है. I hope आपके पास कोई ऐसा, आप जैसे लोग जितना research कर रहे हो, जिनके पास इतना knowledge है, they can find a solution to that.
सर आपका पॉइंट बिल्कुल वैलिड है सर, और मैं इसके पर बारे में बड़ा सोचता हूँ कि यार ये पाकिस्तान में हम where can we apply this in Pakistan? And there are a few things that deal with just human psyche, right? For example, framing. We can definitely use framing in making our proposal. Similarly, जो हमने बात की unilateral concessions, we can always use that as a strategy. And for example, in the toolkit, we talked about creating value in a negotiation. So I'm talking about bigger deals here, right? You're signing a, I don't know, 5 billion or 50 million rupees contract with somebody for buying something or setting up a factory or buying machines to set up a factory, stuff like that. You're trying to create value in a negotiation by adding more issues to what's already on the table, because you want to create more value from in a negotiation. And those are some of the things that can, I think, still apply. There are some that won't apply, but I think human psyche is the same everywhere. So these 8 strategies that we talked about, some may not apply perfectly in our scenario, because if we are dishonest people, we have bad intentions in mind, we want to cheat others, then some of those strategies may or may not be as effective. But I still think that there are some strategies that can still apply, like the biases of the mind, for example, vividness bias. So we make sure that we don't fall prey to the shiny object. So if the other party has come up with a proposal where they think that we'll get attracted by something, so they've highlighted it very high, but we want to make sure that we go through the information and that we're not being influenced by the vivid information, right? The information that's more shiny, looks more attractive, but there is other pieces. So maybe we want to talk about those other areas that are not as vivid, they're dull, but we think are very important to us. So so we want to make sure that from this, I would really make like a checklist. I don't have one, but sir, I'm going to work on it, and I will come up with a checklist, 1-pager, so you don't have to sit for like read 2 books to learn, but a 1-pager checklist that you can go through before walking to a negotiation, and things that will apply in our circumstances. And you are absolutely right. This presentation was not meant when people come to negotiation with dishonesty in their minds. They're thinking about cheating you, and there's fraud involved, and there's misrepresentation as well. I mean, a lot of times that happens.
Well, I think it's Naeem, please do that.
Sir.
We as a forum, CAEP, it is a forum to reckon with, mashallah.
Sir.
Whenever I talk to people, they are saying, why don't you now start interacting with the government? So अगर आप मुझे लिख के भेज दें, so I will, on behalf of CAEP, I'll send it to all the departments of government, even to the Prime Minister.
Sir.
Because ये चीजें बड़ी important है, आपने बड़ी अच्छी बातें की हैं, but under our circumstances हम क्या कर सकते हैं? बल्कि मैं अपने ये जो हमारे moderators हैं, अपना माशाल्लाह बहुत जबरदस्त मंजर और सलाह और सलाउद्दीन और अपना नासिर, मैं इनसे रिक्वेस्ट करूंगा कि इनकी जो कुछ ऐसे लेटर्स हमारे CAP फॉर्म से बनवाएं. Now let's become effective, in terms of जो हमारी गवर्नेंस. मेरा बस इतना आपसे रिक्वेस्ट होगी, ये आपने बड़ा जबरदस्त अभी बात की है, ये पॉइंट्स अगर आप लिख के भेज दें काइंडली, so we will send it across to the government and tell them, and even we can arrange your, a kind of a webinar or seminar with some of the government officials around. So they must know, यार जाग जाओ.
Exactly, sir. Sir, exactly. आपने बिल्कुल सही कहा सर. अब गवर्नमेंट के लोग हैं, मैं मिनिस्टर बैठा हूँ, मैंने तो अपने कमीशन में इंटरेस्टेड हूँ, तो मैंने क्या नेगोशिएशन करनी है सर? मैं तो
exactly.
Right. So I mean, of course, all of these will not apply, but I mean, I think things are getting better. At least that's what I think, and I want to think that things are getting better.
Mashallah, mashallah.
Sir, Salim Rahman from G2, sir, so we want to say something?
A very good presentation, Naeem. All very, very useful points. Our lady wives are instinctive negotiators, even if they don't. Because while going through your points, I was trying to reconnect with the strategies that they use, and and believe me, they, without knowing the fancy words, they do use the strategy. And having said that, once again, a very good presentation. Thanks a lot.
So thank you.
Sir Salim, I refer point number 3.
सर नेगोशिएशन इक्वल पार्टीज में होती है सर, नेगोशिएशन इक्वल पार्टी में होती है, बॉस और एम्प्लॉय में नहीं होती.
Sir, I have a question. Asfar, if you have a question, you go ahead. Then उसके बाद Sir Irfan, and then Sir Salman, and then Sir Salahuddin.
Sure, sir. Thank you. I asked a couple of questions in the chat box. So maybe if you can, sir, if you can read those and maybe if you can answer.
नहीं, आप बोल दें तो ताकि दूसरे भी जरा.
अच्छा, sure. So, sir, my first question.
But be brief.
Absolutely. So my question was around, normally the academic material is normally, predicated around, assuming that the human being is a rational person. And you did touch upon it in, a few of your slides, but it was mostly, I felt, a little bit of more theoretical. Real life is a little different, where we have to deal with irrational people, and they, as you said, have a lot of biases that are not really addressed in a theoretical setting, right? So, if I am of a different color or religion or some other, I have some, have other bias, right, that some person may. How do you negotiate with in a circumstance like that, and especially if you're dealing with a hostile party, right? That was my first question. And my other question was around, we learn a lot of material and there's a lot of information that needs to get processed, but in a negotiation, it's mostly more dynamic and spontaneous in nature. It's sometimes we have to act in a very quickly respond, into a situation, have to have a lot of awareness. So how can we harness all this theoretical knowledge that you have provided us? So those are my couple of questions. Thank you.
So, I would say that you're absolutely right. Some people are very irrational. The objective of this discussion here was, to look at the most common biases people have, and also the strategies that can help you influence other people, right? Now, not every single strategy will apply, but I would say that before you walk into negotiation, if you spend a few minutes preparing for the negotiation, a lot of the time what happens is we just walk into a negotiation. We really don't prepare for a negotiation the way it's being recommended, right? Now, all of those, the strategies are based on human psychology. Most humans think the same. We're not different. We are all the same people. Our minds are hardwired. Remember when we talked about the perceived gains and the perceived losses? If you just frame it differently and talk about perceived losses, then that's going to be more effective. So really being aware of these biases and influence strategies, read more on these, because in an hour. You can't be a negotiation genius in an hour, right? You got to read up more, and maybe there are more biases that exist that we didn't talk about, and learn more about the ones that we did talk about, and understand those biases and influence strategies in depth. We didn't go in depth. We barely touched upon those. So I guess this information is going to be useful to you and to anybody only if you go in depth. We just barely touched the surface. We got to go into details of each one of them and then see which ones will apply to my situation. And every situation you walk into is going to be different. If you are if you are, like in a provisioning section, contract management, or contractor management department of a company, you would be dealing with multiple contractors, right? So everybody is different. So you need to first go into more depth. We didn't go into depth at all. And then really understand which one are you going to use and how. And then everybody and every other party that you're negotiating your deal with is going to be different. Not each one of these strategies will apply to every single negotiation. Some will be more effective in one situation, and others will be more effective in another situation. So I guess my point being is, and when you're dealing with irrational people, like when there's commissions involved, there's no negotiation, right? I'm only worried about my commission. Okay, so what's my commission? Which bank do I get it in, and do I get it cash? Do I get it in dollars, or right? When the conversation is about that's different, right? Yeah, you can't apply
there
these.
is some negotiation involved there as well, right? How much commission am I supposed to get?
Yeah, I mean, you're right. So, but I mean, my point is, these strategies and this knowledge will not apply to every single situation in every single country and for every single person. These are high level. Take from it what you can. Make your own pitch based on some of these biases and some of these influence strategies. So for example, taking coffee for a negotiation, that's huge, right? And then unilateral concessions. We didn't talk about that much, but it has huge impact in a normal negotiation with people with rational mindsets. My expectation is that we're dealing with this is a lot that's super educated, and it's probably the cream of the cream in Pakistan. So you guys are not negotiating with Kalinwalas, right? Perhaps, and you're not trying to use these tactics with those guys.
May I request Sir Irfan to please जो आपने question पूछा. Sir Irfan is around.
I think left.
अच्छा. Sir Salman, are you online?
Yes, I am.
Sir, please go ahead. आपका कोई question था?
जी बिल्कुल, I'll just do that. Naeem, thank you very much for a very enlightening talk.
Sir.
Parts of which I did attend.
Sir.
And I want to tell you that I've been in some important and worth negotiations in the past 20 years that I've been in Qatar.
Right, sir.
But so from practical point of view, I've not had any theory or any learning. But from practical point of view, for me, the most important aspect, other than the actual give and take sessions, is the preparation for such a negotiation.
Correct.
For more info that you have about the opponents, the better prepared you are. But I found that many skilled negotiators are fully focused on what they want to achieve. And that's the preparation they do. They want to know exactly what are their limits, what is their aim, how much room for negotiation is there, what is the threshold, what is the bottom line, and the rest of the things that you talked about, like skills of negotiation or strategies or behavioral things from the other opponents, that all fall, and he then picks and chooses what is the best for him from that particular aspect, how to strategize his negotiation, how to take care of the behavioral analogies that the other guys have, and so forth. So knowing your own aims and limits is perhaps the most important factor from practical aspect. Do you agree? And if not, then tell me which other factor you think is the most important one.
Sir, aapne bilkul sahi kaha. A lot of us don't actually prepare for negotiations, and we talked about a 5-step pre-negotiation framework. Another thing we learned and we emphasized on in this discussion was to talk less and learn more about the other party, because in a good negotiation, and I'm talking about like big negotiations here, at government department level and the types of negotiations that you have been part of, you want to talk less and learn more about the other party. You want to convert demands into opportunities, and you want to add more issues to the conversation so that you can create value in it. So the value isn't really fixed. You can add more value to it by adding issues, or log rolling, where you trade across multiple issues. So, you giving here, but then you ask for a concession in another area that's probably not so important for the other side, but for you it's big. So I guess you're probably using most of these, and I'm sure most of us on this forum are probably using most of these techniques, but maybe we haven't seen all of this information put together like this before, but what very, very senior and accomplished.
Sir, maybe by knowing or by not knowing.
Yeah, you're right. But we haven't really seen all this information put together like this. But we talked about the 5-step pre-negotiation framework. That is extremely important. How do you assess the other party's BATNA and their reservation value when you don't know them? And then even when you go into a negotiation, we talk about asking the question why. So you want to understand, why are they thinking what they are thinking, right? Because you want to create opportunities from it. So I guess.
So Naeem, you agree that the most important factor, if there was to be one single doubt, was the preparation of it for the negotiation, right?
So for me, if you ask me, preparation and then knowing as much as possible about the other party, their people and their thought process and their situation. Yes.
Right. Thank you.
Yes.
Naeem, I would like to add, in knowing about the other party, also knowing about their vernacular language can be sometime an advantage, because
yes.
Sometimes on the sidelines they talk to each other and say something which they would not like to do it in the presentation.
So very right. And actually, what, I'm a big fan of being a linguistic, learning more languages. And I've learned French. I spent several years learning French and Arabic. So I'm a big fan. Yeah, like you know as many languages, and they're the slangs they use as much as possible. Absolutely.
Sir, first of all, a comment. Wonderful presentation. A lot of learning. और अगर मैं ये कहूँ कि इस पूरी presentation का अगर कोई gist है तो that is KYC. Know your client.
बिल्कुल सही कहा आपने. बिल्कुल सही कहा.
That is this topic. उसमें थोड़ा सा अपना शेयर करूँगा. मुझे अक्सर अपनी negotiation पे negotiate करना पड़ता है. अपनी salary पे negotiate करना पड़ता है जब भी मैं नई job के लिए apply करता हूँ. और गैप जनरली 10 से 20 हज़ार का गैप होता है जो मेरी डिमांड होती है और जो उनकी ऑफर होती है. तो हाउ डू आई डू इट? मैं हमेशा कहता हूँ देखो मैं इस सैलरी पे भी आ सकता हूँ, बट इफ आई कम ऑन दिस सैलरी तो मुझे हमेशा ही होगा यार प्रॉब्ली कि मैं अंडर वैल्यू हो रहा हूँ. तो व्हाई डोंट यू ऑफर मी व्हाट आई एम डिमांडिंग यू? इन दिस वे देन आई विल हैव more relationship with you and more likely to stay with you. So they understand, and most of the time I get my demand whatever for me. So that is one comment. Question ये है सर आपसे कि आपने नेगोशिएशन की बात की दो पार्टियों के दरमियान. एक पार्टी जनरली आपकी सारी इस पे जो था दो पार्टियों के दरमियान नेगोशिएशन बात हुई. तो व्हाट इफ दिस सिचुएशन इज वन टू मैनी? फॉर एग्जांपल एक हाउस है, मैं वेरी सिंपल मिसाल दे रहा हूँ, उसके बहुत सारे खरीदार हैं. तो इन दैट सिचुएशन, बीइंग ए खरीदार, हाउ शुड आई बिहेव? व्हाट टैक्टिक्स और स्ट्रेटजी शुड आई यूज?
So they can be being a buyer, and you're right. There are multiple buyers, and especially Canada, the property market is really
just an
hot.
example, sir. This is just an example.
Yeah, it is hot. So for one house, there are like 20, 30, 50 offers. So that means there are 50 buyers for that one house. In this market, at least in Canada, things are very, very different, right? All of these skills won't really apply much because the thing is the customer has an asking price, the seller, sorry, has an asking price, and there are 50 buyers, and many of them offering over asking price, right? So here you are making sometimes even $100, $150, $200,000 over asking price. So in that kind of a market, these types of negotiation skills won't really apply, because remember, there were some situations when you don't negotiate, right? When not to negotiate. We talked about it. When your BATNA stinks and everybody knows it. So if your offer is really low, everybody knows it. There's no point negotiating. Or when, so I guess for this kind of a situation, there is no negotiation. You just throw in your offer. Price is the only thing. Price is the only thing. And there are 50 people buying a house. If you were the only one, then I would say, in a situation where the market is not hot, you're the only one, then I would say you would bring in other things, payment terms. You might want to ask the seller to upgrade the lawn, for example, the garage doors, or hardwood flooring, stuff like that. So if it was a one-on-one, you would try to add more things to it and see if you can add just more terms, right? Payment terms and upgrades, and not just price.
Okay. Thank you, sir.
You're welcome.
Any other question by any respectable participant?
सर मेरा एक सवाल है कि ये तो खैर बाकी जो छोटी मोटी चीजें हैं, बट जो बड़ी बिग टैग नेगोशिएशंस होती हैं, उसमें वो एक तो बड़ी अच्छी आपने बात की कि उसमें प्रेपरेशन होनी चाहिए, ओपन प्रेपरेशन, स्टडिंग, आप एक दूसरे को स्टडी करें, देखें, हालात को देखें, कंडीशंस को देखें, और फिर आप इफ यू आर लाइक यू टॉक्ड ऑफ irrational escalations, on the other side, if I say the rational escalation, okay, when both of the parties or whatever stakeholders are, they open up and they declare everything and everything is known about everyone. So probably there could be win-win situation in a great relationship, and you can have the best rewards by having a rational escalation. So what do you think on that? That if a situation is completely open, there is no manipulation, there is no hidden kind of agendas and kind of tricks. So if everyone studies each other, and then you want to have a good relationship, and then you want to have a closing that deal. So I think the rational escalation, if you continue to have that, so you can have the best reward on win-win position for everybody. So what do you think about it?
So that is true. And what I talked about was really escalation of commitment as a human behavior. Most people, just psychologically, our brains are hardwired to escalate our commitment. So once you have taken a decision, chances are you want to stick to it. And then if you have invested too much already, even though it's bad for you, you just stay on guard and stay on track only because of that psychological factor, which is called escalation of commitment. Because you've already invested in it, and you keep digging yourself deeper and deeper and deeper. So I guess what I was trying to say was, be aware of that psychological influence that might be impacting how you are negotiating your deal. You want to be aware of that trap that you may fall into. So make sure that you're not just digging yourself much deeper unnecessarily. Maybe it's time to go back home. Maybe it's time to retreat. And that's why we talked about having an exit strategy in mind, pre-planned exit strategy, so that you can, right? And then also we said we'll bring in a devil's advocate to review the situation.
Yeah, and you can use exit strategy as a negotiating tactic as well.
Could be.
I mean, you can always say, okay, so I'm getting out of it, so that's it. So when you say that I'm walking out of it, so that could be a strategy to get another escalation,
Yeah, true. But these are human behaviors that we normally, like engineers, we don't really learn human behaviors. And basically, in my presentation, most of the things that I talked about were related to how human minds think. and behave, right?
Sir, actually, this presentation is much above common engineers level. So,
well, no, that's not true. But
so,
I think engineers are
yeah,
intellectual people and they understand stuff, but we're not exposed to these things on a regular basis.
I agree with you. But this was a great presentation. Thank you very much. I appreciate that.
Thank you, Kasser.
Sir Naeem, thank you very much for honoring my request and everybody. And I think जो genuine public रह गई है सर वो for the only one है.
सर एक सवाल पूछ सकता हूँ? एक सवाल और।
जी सर।
अच्छा, तो सवाल ये समटाइम्स होता ही है कि जो आपका अपोनेंट होता है, मे बी इज अ ग्रेटर स्ट्रेंथ, उसकी पावर ज्यादा है नेगोशिएट करने में, तो वो क्या करता है आपसे पहले ही पूछना शुरू हो जाता है, आर यू गोना कम ऑन दिस टर्म्स और नॉट, ठीक है। अब अभी तक ये कि ही डजंट नो मी मच, मैं तो जाना चाहता हूँ वहाँ पे, लेकिन वो मैं चले मिसाल दे देता हूँ बात को समझाने के लिए, लेकिन इसको आप कहीं पर भी अप्लाई कर सकते हैं। मैं कहीं पे जॉब के लिए फॉर एग्जांपल अप्लाई करता हूँ, तो दे विल आस्क मी, ओके आर यू गोना कम एट 100K और 150K और 200K, राइट? Now they don't know me right now. I'm not being able to sell myself at this point, and they are asking me right now whether you want to come at this point or not. Now what options do I have in this situation? ये मैं सिर्फ एग्जांपल दे रहा हूँ समझाने के लिए, लेकिन पॉइंट ये कि in such situation where one party is a dominant party in a negotiation, in that situation how should we behave, how should we negotiate?
Sir Naeem, I request sir, ये Salman Aslam is also asking some question, तो दोनों को एक साथ ही, अगर this is the last question.
Okay.
Please Salman, go ahead.
Sir, thank you. It was a really, really good presentation. I was a bit skeptical coming inside, but it was really worth the time. So thank you for your effort, and it was really, really nice. Because we normally think that we're good negotiators because we've been doing it all our lives, but realize that this cheese ko formalize karne.
Will you please introduce yourself?
Sir, my name is Group Captain Salman. I am currently serving in Pakistan Air Force. I am from G13, sir.
Oh, I see. Okay, so you're still serving. Mashallah.
Sir, I'm still serving.
Go ahead.
So, thank you for your experience and your knowledge, sir. Sir, जिस तरह पिछले sir ने कहा कि one scenario that he came up with is कि what if the other person is in a position of power. मेरी अभी recently एक experience हुआ जहाँ पे जो limitation थी वो bandwidth की थी कि you have to use the minimum amount of words. तो negotiation में एक अथॉरिटी फिगर है जिसके सामने आप बहुत ज्यादा बोल नहीं सकते, या ईमेल है जिसपे आप बहुत ज्यादा बैक एंड फोर्थ नहीं हो सकते, जहाँ पे bandwidth limitation हो, and तो वहाँ पे in such situations I'm just curious to know कि आपके ज़हन में क्या बात आती है, and it's a fair scenario ताकि आपकी वाली जो बात है your framework is now applicable. वो हम वो बात नहीं करेंगे, वो दो नंबरी वाली situation है, but low bandwidth situations you can't say a lot. For any reason, what are your views, sir, please, on that? Thank you.
Yeah, okay, no, that's a really good question. So let me answer that first because so what I would do is, I mean, even if you only had the opportunity to send an email and that's it, you have no face-to-face time, just an email. So in your email, when you make your offer or your proposal, you want to make sure that you are using at least some of the strategies that we talked about. So a unilateral concession, could I use that in my proposal, even though it's an email proposal, but could I use that? Could I frame it in a way where, right, we talked about how people perceive, perceived gains versus perceived losses. So you can use that, leverage that technique. And then a pre-negotiation framework is everything you do before you walk into a negotiation. And that's something that will apply to an email proposal, or even if you just had 5 minutes to say something. But the preparation is so important, right? Because you want to learn about the other party. What is their best alternative if we didn't close this deal? What would they do? What could be their reservation value? What's my BATNA? I want to know what's my minimum acceptable offer. So, you can still use a lot of this information that we presented, and the human psyche is still the same. Whether I read it or whether I hear it, the impact will still be the same. So I guess my point is that when you have just very little time, you just have to be, do more preparation because you have very little time. So how can you be so concise and still leverage some of these techniques to make your proposal impactful? That's really the ultimate objective. How can you influence the other side? Now, if you have 5 minutes, it's more difficult. But if you have 2 days of negotiations, it's much easier, right? You can take coffee, you can take them out for lunch another day, and unilateral concessions and stuff like that. But the less amount of time you have to make your proposal, the harder it is. But I think that some of these techniques can still be leveraged.
सर मैं थोड़ा सलमान की बात को थोड़ा सा ऐड कर दूं कि बाद फॉर एग्जांपल विद इन द एयरफोर्स आपको पता है जब हम कोई बड़ी बिग डील कर रहे होते हैं वी आर नॉट इन ए टर्म्स where we could dictate our negotiation because we are in need of those things and those are the more multinational companies and they have the more power rather decision making to sell it or not to sell it. Then once it becomes your need then you are at the backstage.
So मंजर मैं आपको इसका जवाब बड़ा सिंपल सा दूंगा कि और मैंने आपको जो ये सिचुएशन बल्कि ये मेरी जो स्लाइड I don't know if it's I'm sorry I'm not sharing now but when your BATNA stinks and everybody knows it it's like you know जो इमरान खान या सारे हमारे प्राइम मिनिस्टर कहते हैं कि जी हमने IMF से लोन लिया है तो उनकी तो हमें टर्म्स माननी पड़ेंगी. Yeah, of course they know your BATNA, right? You don't have a BATNA, it stinks, so you can't negotiate. That was my point.
Rana, please quick go ahead.
Sir Naeem, thank you for your presentation. It was a very good presentation, sir. And I just have one question because I have been negotiating with the government organization, which is Pakistan Railway, which is very difficult to negotiate. You see that your opponent is one. If he keeps on negotiating, it doesn't matter to him or to that organization whether there are losses to them. But you, since you are a private company or private-owned company where you are negotiating and you are making losses, and you can't do unilateral concessions also because there is a limitation. How to deal with that kind of a situation?
So I mean, you know, so we talked about 8 strategies, right? I would say frame your proposal in a way that's going to be more appealing to the other side. You know, there could be limitations. I'm not exactly sure what your situation is, and maybe we can have an offline conversation. But what I'm saying is there are some situations when you just can't negotiate, right? That's why I have a slide. When not to negotiate, you just walk away from a negotiation because your relationship might be impacted because of it.
In that case, I'll just add that we cannot move out because there is warranties which are at risk. So you have a $1 million risk which is at stake if you move out of that negotiations. So you forcefully you have to stay into the negotiations, but get a win-win situation is difficult because what they need is a win situation for them, and if you don't get any win situation from my side, for them it does not make any difference if they keep on negotiating on that.
You know, yeah, so, but also keep in mind when you add multiple issues, bring in issues that are not on the on the table, add more issues to it, and you know, shift the conversation to other areas if you could. There is a possibility because the thing is, a lot of times you get fixated on one issue that is a bottleneck, right? So you know, the other party's demands, look for opportunities in those. Are not necessarily bad. So we don't have to be, is what I was saying, you know, you don't have to be defensive when the other party is demanding something. We should look for opportunities from those demands. And I gave you an example of the contractor, right? So that guy put a huge penalty and then they say, okay, I accept the penalty, but if I finish it 2 weeks ahead of time, you're going to give me $100,000 bonus.
Exactly, sir. There are many things which can be done, but if it's okay for you, we can, if I can talk to you separately on these things.
For sure, for sure.
It's okay.
Yeah. Manzur has my contact.
Sir Naeem, I think it's quite some time, so आप गिटार पकड़ लें and let the people. इससे पहले जब तक आप गिटार की तैयारी करें, let me close this.
रिकॉर्डिंग बंद करवा दें सर ताकि
रिकॉर्डिंग क्या मतलब भाई कोई हम बेहुदा गाना थोड़ी चला रहे हैं डांस थोड़ी करेंगे इसके साथ तो वो एक लतीफा था शायद आई शेयर्ड विद यू नॉट दैट के वो एक खातून थी ना तो वो एक शौहर थे वो अपने दोस्त के पास गए कि यार मुझे क्या कर मेरी बीवी किसी तरह मानती नहीं कोई नाराज उन्होंने कहा निगोशिएशन स्किल सीखो जाके ना उन्होंने कहा क्या निगोशिएशन स्किल सीखो उन्होंने कहा आज जाके ना रोमांस करो उसके साथ और उससे कहो कि आज तो आप 16 साल की लग रही है वो कहता है वो गया उसके पास उसने कहा आज तो आप 16 साल की वो चिंगाड़ी कि पहले तो तुम पागलों जैसी बातें करते थे, अब तो तुम अंधे भी हो गए हो। तो उसने कहा ये तो negotiation skill you have to see where to say and what to say and when not to say. So sir, please go ahead. And I am extremely thankful for sparing your valuable time.
चलिए, थैंक यू एवरीबॉडी यार, बहुत मजा आया। तो मुझे नहीं पता आप अभी आप आर यू एबल टू स्टिल सी मी, लाइक मेरी स्क्रीन तो नहीं आ रही हमारी?
हाँ, नहीं बस लगा दें, आप जो लगाना है चला दें।
अबे यार, अच्छा ठीक है जी, बिल्कुल बिल्कुल।
Now we are going to have a good song from Naeem. He is a good singer.
पता नहीं आपको नजर आ रहा है, ये मैं चमका के रखा है आप लोगों के लिए। आवाज आ रही है?
आ रही सर, आ रही है, आ रही है।
West Virginia, Blue Ridge Mountains, Shenandoah River. Life is older, older than the trees, younger than the mountains, growing like a breeze. Take me home to the place I born, West Virginia, Montana. Take me home, country road, country roads. Take me home, country road, country road.
वंडरफुल सर, वंडरफुल, जबरदस्त।
थैंक यू वेरी मच यार, बड़ा मजा आया। थैंक यू मंजर, आप लोगों का, सलाउद्दीन आपका बहुत शुक्रिया।
नो प्रॉब्लम सर, यू मोस्ट वेलकम।
चलिए सर, आपको ये नई अच्छी सी प्रेजेंटेशन ईद के बाद पेश करें।
हाँ, ईद के बाद सर बिल्कुल ये कंटिन्यू रहना चाहिए सर, दिस नॉट शुड नॉट बी द लास्ट।
इंशाल्लाह।
वो आपकी जो एक्सपर्टीज है, मतलब जो आईटीएल तो सिक्योरिटी तो पता नहीं क्या।
ठीक है, उसकी भी बात कर लेंगे इंशाल्लाह, एक दिन आईटीएल की बात करेंगे, बिल्कुल ठीक है।
ओके, थैंक यू सर।
ओके, थैंक्स एवरीबॉडी।
थैंक यू सर, थैंक यू, अल्लाह हाफिज।